They say lightning never strikes the same place twice. For 67 years, I believed that applied to love as well. I was wrong. My name is Merritt Caldwell, and I'm about to tell you something that will sound impossible to anyone who's buried a spouse, anyone who's felt that particular brand of emptiness that comes from losing your other half. I'm going to tell you that the heart, this stubborn, the resilient muscle that keeps beating even when you wish it wouldn't, can surprise you. Even at 67, even after you've said your final goodbye, even after you've learned to live with the ghost of what was. This isn't a fairy tale. I don't believe in those anymore. But it is a love story, my second one, and perhaps the more remarkable for coming when I least expected it, least wanted it, and least felt I deserved it. If you're reading this and you've loved and lost, if you're wondering whether the best chapters of your life are behind you, if you've resigned yourself to a quiet fade into the twilight years, then perhaps you need to hear what happened to me on an ordinary Tuesday in October, in a place I never wanted to be, doing something I've been dreading for months. But first, you need to understand what came before. You need to know about Lorna. Lorna Mae Caldwell died on a Thursday. I remember that detail with crystal clarity, though so much else from those days exists in my memory as a blur of condolence casseroles and sympathetic head tilts. It was a Thursday in late April, when the dogwoods were blooming outside our bedroom window, their white petals like small declarations of hope that mocked my devastation. She had been sick for 14 months, pancreatic cancer, the kind that gives you just enough time to say everything that needs saying and not nearly enough time to say it all again. We've been married for 41 years. 41 years of morning coffee made exactly how she liked it. Too much cream, according to me, but perfect according to her. 41 years of her humming off-key in the shower, of arguments about the thermostat, of her cold feet finding my warm legs under the covers on winter nights. 41 years of ordinary, extraordinary love. People who haven't experienced a long marriage, and I mean truly long, decades long, often romanticize it or minimize it. They imagine either constant bliss or comfortable boredom. The truth is more complex and infinitely more precious. A marriage that lasts that long becomes its own language, its own country. You build a life together that's so interwoven, so utterly interdependent, that when one person leaves, the other isn't just heartbroken. They're geographically displaced, lost. Lorna knew she was dying for a year before she died. That's both a blessing and a curse. We had time to prepare, time to say the important things, time to hold each other and cry and rage against the unfairness of it all. But we also had time to watch her diminish, to see the vibrant woman I loved become a frail shadow, to helplessly witness her pain despite the morphine, despite the kind hospice nurses, despite my desperate prayers to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. 3 days before she died, she gripped my hand with surprising strength and fixed me with those green eyes that had first caught my attention at a community theater production of Our Town in 1981. "Merritt," she whispered, her voice raspy from the oxygen tube. "Promise me something." "Anything," I said, and I meant it. "Don't disappear into yourself when I'm gone. Don't become one of those ghosts who's still breathing." She paused, gathering strength. "You have to keep living, really living, not just existing." I promised, the way you promise anything to someone you love who's dying, knowing you mean it completely in that moment and having no idea if you'll be able to keep it. The day she died, I was holding her hand. Our daughter Simone was on the other side of the bed. Lorna simply stopped breathing between one moment and the next, as if she'd finally decided she'd fought long enough and it was time to rest. The hospice nurse said it was peaceful. I'm still not sure what peaceful means when someone's dying, but I held on to that word like a life raft anyway. The funeral was well attended. Lorna had taught third grade for 30 years. And farmer students, now adults with children of their own, came to pay respects to the teacher who'd made them love reading or math, or simply made them feel seen during a difficult childhood. I shook hands and accepted hugs and said thank you for coming. So many times the phrase lost all meaning, became just sounds emerging from my mouth on autopilot. And then everyone went home. The casseroles eventually ran out. The phone calls became less frequent. Simone, bless her heart, checked in daily at first, then every few days, then weekly. She had her own life, her own family in Portland. I didn't begrudge her that. This is what children are supposed to do. Grow up, move away, build their own lives. It's what parents hope for, even as we secretly wish they'd stay close. I was alone in the house Lorna and I had shared for 38 years, and the silence was deafening. Grief is not linear. I learned this the hard way. Books and well-meaning friends told me about the stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, acceptance, as if mourning were a journey with a clear map and a definite destination. But grief isn't a journey. It's more like weather. Some days it's a light drizzle you can mostly ignore. Other days it's a hurricane that knocks you flat and leaves you gasping for air. I went through the motions. I woke up, made coffee for one, too much cream still, because changing that felt like betrayal, read the newspaper, worked in the garden Lorna had loved, watched television without really seeing it, went to bed. Repeat. Simone worried. She'd call and try to sound casual while fishing for information about whether I was eating properly, whether I was socializing, whether I was taking care of myself. I lied and said I was fine, because the truth that I was merely occupying space, not truly living, would have broken her heart. Months passed this way. Then a year. Then 2. I wasn't unhappy exactly. I was numb. I existed in a gray space where nothing was particularly terrible, but nothing was particularly good either. I'd forgotten Lorna's deathbed plea about really living. Or maybe I'd remembered it and simply lacked the energy or desire to honor it. Then something happened that forced my hand. I had a health scare. Nothing life-threatening, but serious enough to require tests and doctors, appointments, and that particular brand of anxiety that comes from waiting for results. Turned out to be benign, a kidney stone, painful but treatable, but it shook me, made me look in the mirror and really see myself for the first time in years. I looked old, not just older, which would have been natural at 67, but old in a way that spoke of giving up. Gray, tired, defeated. And I heard Lorna's voice in my head as clearly as if she were standing beside me. Don't become one of those ghosts who's still breathing. That's when I decided to do something I've been avoiding since she died. I started going through her things. Our bedroom closet had become a shrine. Lorna's clothes still hung there, untouched, as if she might need them again. Her jewelry box sat on the dresser. Her reading glasses remained on her nightstand next to a bookmark in a novel she'd never finish. Simone had gently suggested, several times, that I might want to donate Lorna's belongings. It might help with closure, Dad, she'd said carefully, as if addressing a bomb that might detonate at any moment. But I hadn't been ready. Now, 2.5 years after her death, standing in front of that closet with a box of garbage bags in hand, I still wasn't sure I was ready, but I was going to do it anyway. I started with the easy things: old shoes, worn-out sweaters, items that held no particular emotional significance. I worked methodically, fighting the urge to smell each piece of clothing for a trace of her perfume, knowing that would undo me completely. Then I found the box. It was on the top shelf, plain cardboard, labeled in Lorna's neat handwriting, "For merit, when you're ready." My hands shook as I pulled it down. Inside were letters, dozens of them, each in an envelope marked with a date or an occasion. For your first birthday without me, for our anniversary, for when you're angry at me for leaving, for when you meet someone new. That last one stopped me cold. I sat on the edge of our bed, my bed now, and stared at that envelope. When you meet someone new. Not if, when. As if Lorna had known with absolute certainty that I would, someday, find love again. As if she'd assumed it, expected it, wanted it. My hands were trembling so badly I could barely open the envelope. The letter inside was longer than the others, several pages in her handwriting, which had gotten shakier toward the end of her life, but was still distinctly, unmistakably hers. "My dearest Merritt," it began, "if you're reading this, it means you've met someone. Maybe you've just met her, or maybe you've been seeing her for a while, and you pulled out this letter because you're feeling guilty or confused, or both. Either way, I want you to know this. I'm happy for you. I know that sounds strange. I know the traditional narrative says I should be jealous, even from beyond the grave. But Merritt, my love, I know you. I know that you're not someone who can live alone for long. I don't mean you're dependent or weak. Quite the opposite. You're someone who thrives in partnership, who needs to love and be loved, who is your best self when you have someone to care for. These past 41 years with you have been the greatest gift of my life. You made me feel cherished every single day. You made me laugh even when I wanted to cry. You held my hand through the scary parts and celebrated with me through the joyful parts. You were, quite simply, the best husband I could have imagined. And because of that, because you loved me so well, I know you have more love to give. That love doesn't die with me, Merritt. It lives on in you, waiting for the right person to receive it. I know you're probably feeling guilty right now. Maybe you think that loving someone new means loving me less or forgetting me. But that's not how love works. The heart doesn't have a finite capacity. It expands. The love you gave me doesn't disappear just because you love someone else too. I want you to be happy. I want you to have someone to make coffee for in the morning. Someone whose cold feet find your warm legs at night. Someone to argue with about the thermostat. You have too much life left to spend it alone, mourning me. So here's what I'm asking. Don't feel guilty. Don't think you're betraying me. Don't wait for some arbitrary amount of time to pass before you allow yourself to feel joy again. If you meet someone who makes you laugh, who challenges you, who makes you want to get up in the morning, embrace it, run toward it, say yes to it. You gave me a beautiful life, Merritt Caldwell. Now go give yourself one too. I love you always, Lorna. I read that letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face, my chest tight with a complicated mixture of grief and relief and something that felt suspiciously like hope. The truth was, I hadn't met anyone. I wasn't even close to meeting anyone. At 67, living as a hermit in a house full of memories, my social circle had shrunk to the grocery store cashier and the mail carrier. The very idea of meeting someone, of dating again, felt absurd. But Lorna's letter planted a seed. For the first time in 2.5 years, I allowed myself to imagine it. Not in concrete terms. I couldn't picture a face or a name, but as a distant possibility. A door that might someday open if I was brave enough to turn the handle. Simone's idea, naturally, "Dad, you need to get out of the house. You need to do something, anything," she said during one of our weekly phone calls. "What about a class? You used to love making things with your hands." I'd been a carpenter before retirement, had taken pride in creating furniture that would last, in the satisfaction of transforming raw wood into something beautiful and functional. But I hadn't touched my tools since Lorna died. The workshop in the garage gathered dust, a monument to the person I used to be. "I don't know, Simone." "Dad." Her voice took on that firm tone that reminded me she was, indeed, my daughter, stubborn and persistent. "Mom wouldn't want this. You know she wouldn't." Low blow, but effective. And she was right. So I found myself on a Tuesday evening in October walking into the Riverside Community Center for an 8-week beginner pottery class. The room smelled of clay and damp earth. 8 pottery wheels were arranged in a circle, and 6 people were already there, chatting nervously, the way adults do when forced into a classroom setting. I almost turned around and left. But then the instructor, a cheerful woman in her 30s named Kelly, with clay-stained jeans and an infectious smile, welcomed me warmly and directed me to a wheel. I sat down, stared at the lump of clay in front of me, and wondered what the hell I was doing here. That's when she walked in. She was flustered, apologizing for being late, juggling a large bag and a travel mug of coffee that threatened to spill with every step. Her hair, gray and silver, pulled back in a loose bun, was coming undone, and she had a smudge of what looked like paint on her cheek. "I'm so sorry," she said, setting her things down at the wheel next to mine. "Traffic was terrible, and then I couldn't find parking, and—" She stopped, seeming to realize she was over-explaining to a room full of strangers. "I'm Nadine, sorry. Don't worry about it," Kelly said kindly. "We're just getting started. Everyone, let's go around and introduce ourselves." I barely heard the other introductions. I was acutely, uncomfortably aware of the woman sitting 2 feet to my right. She had a nice face, not beautiful in any conventional sense, but open, expressive, with smile lines around her eyes that suggested she laughed often. She was probably close to my age, maybe a bit younger. She wore jeans and a paint-splattered button-down shirt that looked like it might have belonged to a man once. When it was my turn, I said, "I'm Merritt. I'm here because my daughter thought I needed a hobby." A few people chuckled, including Nadine, and I felt absurdly pleased. "I'm Nadine," she said when her turn came. "I'm here because I'm terrible at sitting still and I've always wanted to try this." Her voice was warm, slightly husky, with a hint of nervousness underneath. Kelly demonstrated basic techniques: how to center the clay, how to form a bowl, how to avoid the common mistakes that beginners make. Then she set us loose to try it ourselves. It was harder than it looked, much harder. My first attempt collapsed into a lopsided mess within 30 seconds. My second attempt flew off the wheel entirely and splattered clay across my shirt. "Well," said a voice beside me, "at least you're wearing it better than I am." I looked over. Nadine's hands, arms, and face were covered in clay. Her bowl looked like it had been through a natural disaster, and she was laughing, not in embarrassment, but with genuine amusement at herself. I found myself laughing too, for the first time in longer than I could remember. "I think we're both going to need new clothes," I said. "Or we could just lean into it," she replied. "Start a new fashion trend, clay chic." For the rest of the class, we struggled alongside each other, offering sympathetic groans when things went wrong and small celebrations when something went right. We didn't talk much. We were too focused on wrestling with the clay. But there was a comfortable ease to her presence. At the end of the class, as we were cleaning up, she turned to me and said, "Same time next week?" "I'll be here," I said, and meant it. The pottery class became the highlight of my week. I told myself it was because I was enjoying the craft, the meditative quality of working with clay, the satisfaction of slowly improving. And that was partly true. By week 3, I could make a passable bowl. By week 5, I'd graduated to a vase that didn't look like a kindergartner's art project. But the real reason, if I'm being honest, was Nadine. We talked during class. Small talk at first. The weather, how our projects were progressing, complaints about how difficult Kelly made it look. Then, gradually, more personal topics emerged. I learned that she was a widow too. Her husband, Grant, had died 3 years ago of a heart attack. Sudden, unexpected, the kind of death that gives you no time to prepare or say goodbye. One minute, we were planning a trip to visit our son in Colorado, she told me one evening, as we both struggled with handles for our mugs. And the next minute, he was on the floor, and I was calling 911. And then he was gone. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling inadequate. as they always do. Thank you. She was quiet for a moment, focused on her mug. It's strange, isn't it? How life just continues. The world doesn't stop just because yours has ended. I understood exactly what she meant. When Lorna died, I'd been shocked that the mail still came, that the sun still rose, that people still went to work and laughed and complained about traffic. The enormous significance of my loss seemed to demand that everything stop. But life is relentlessly, indifferently persistent. How long were you married? I asked. 36 years. She smiled, a sad but genuine expression. He was my high school sweetheart. Can you imagine? We started dating when I was 16, and we were together until he died at 63. I've spent more of my life with him than without him. Lorna and I were married 41 years, I said. It still hurt to talk about her, but less than it used to. Or perhaps hurt wasn't quite the right word anymore. It ached, the way an old injury aches when it rains. Painful, but familiar. How did you meet? Nadine asked. I told her about the community theater production, about how Lorna had been on stage and I'd been in the audience, dragged there by a friend who was dating one of the actresses. I saw her in the second act and completely forgot what the play was about, I said. After the show, I waited by the stage door like some starstruck kid. I was 26 years old and suddenly couldn't remember how to form coherent sentences. Did you ask her out? Eventually, after stammering for about 5 minutes, the memory made me smile. She said yes, thank God, and we had our first date at a terrible Italian restaurant that gave us both food poisoning. We spent the next day taking turns being sick and decided if we could survive that, we could survive anything. Nadine laughed, and I realized I liked making her laugh. It lit up her whole face. Grant and I had our first kiss in the parking lot of a Pizza Hut, she said. Very romantic. He'd just gotten his driver's license, and I remember thinking he was so grown up because he had a car. She shook her head. We were so young. We didn't know anything about anything. But they'd learned together, she told me. Learned how to be married, how to raise their 2 children, how to weather the difficult years when Grant's construction business nearly went under, how to celebrate the good years when things finally stabilized. They'd built a life together, brick by brick, just as Lorna and I had. I didn't realize I was falling for Nadine until the night I almost didn't go to class. It was week 6. I'd had a bad day, one of those days when grief ambushes you out of nowhere. I'd found one of Lorna's sweaters in the back of a drawer, and the smell of her perfume, faint but unmistakable, had knocked the wind out of me. I'd spent an hour sitting on the bedroom floor, holding that sweater, crying in a way I hadn't cried in months. The idea of going to pottery class, of being around people, of pretending to be fine, felt impossible. But then I thought about not seeing Nadine that evening, and that felt worse. That realization terrified me. I sat in my car in the community center parking lot, 15 minutes before class, having an argument with myself. What was I doing? I was too old for this. It was too soon. It felt like betrayal. Lorna had only been gone 2.5 years. People would judge me. I'd judge me. But then I remembered Lorna's letter. Don't wait for some arbitrary amount of time to pass before you allow yourself to feel joy again. And I remembered something else she used to say during those long nights when we knew she was dying. I don't want you to be alone forever, Mare. Promise me you won't be alone forever. I promised, not really believing it would matter. Now here I was, at 67, sitting in a parking lot, terrified of the possibility of not being alone. I went to class. Nadine noticed immediately that something was wrong. During our break, as we were waiting for our pieces to dry, she touched my arm lightly and said, "Are you okay? You seem quiet tonight." I could have brushed it off. Should have, probably. But instead, I found myself saying, "Bad day." Found something of my wife's that I'd forgotten about. Understanding flickered across her face. Those days are the hardest, aren't they? When you think you're doing better, and then something small just breaks you open again. "Yes," I said. Grateful she understood. Grateful I didn't have to explain. "I found Grant's cologne bottle a few months ago," she said quietly. Just this little bottle, mostly empty, tucked in the back of the bathroom cabinet. I'd looked in that cabinet 100 times and somehow never seen it before. And then, suddenly, there it was, and She paused. I sat on the bathroom floor and cried for an hour. "It doesn't get easier, does it?" I said. "It just gets different." "Different," she agreed. "That's exactly the right word." We stood there for a moment in companionable silence, two people who'd loved and lost, who understood that grief wasn't something you got over, but something you learned to carry. And then Nadine said something that changed everything. "Would you like to get coffee sometime? Outside of class, I mean." I think she hesitated, then continued, "I think it might be nice to talk to someone who understands." My heart did something complicated in my chest, a flutter of excitement mixed with a stab of guilt. "I'd like that," I said, and meant it more than I'd meant anything in a long time. We met at a small cafe downtown on a Saturday morning. Neutral territory. Nothing that could be construed as too romantic or too serious. Just two friends getting coffee. That's what I told myself anyway. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of her. "I didn't know what you liked," she said, "so I got you a regular coffee and a latte. Or I can drink both and you can order something else. I'm rambling, sorry." "You're nervous," I observed, sitting down. "Terrified," she admitted with a laugh. "This feels very middle school, like I'm on a date or something, which is ridiculous, because this isn't a date, of course. We're just 2 people getting coffee, 2 friends, not that we're even friends really, we barely know each other." "Nadine," I interrupted gently, "it's okay. I'm nervous too." That seemed to calm her down. We both sipped our coffee. I took the regular, she kept the latte, and for a moment we just looked at each other, acknowledging the strange, scary thing that was happening between us. "Can I ask you something?" she said finally. "Of course. Do you feel guilty? About this, I mean. About us talking, about—" She trailed off, unable or unwilling to name what this might become. "Yes," I said honestly. "I feel guilty. I feel like I'm betraying Lorna's memory. I feel like it's too soon. I feel like I should still be in mourning, wearing black, avoiding anything that might remotely resemble happiness." She nodded. "I feel all of that too, but I also feel—" She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I also feel more alive than I've felt in 3 years, and that makes me feel even more guilty." "It's a hell of a paradox, isn't it?" "The worst," she agreed. "Grant used to have this saying, 'The only way out is through.' He said it about everything. Difficult home repairs, arguments with the kids, bad times at work. Just put your head down and keep moving forward. The only way out is through." "That's good advice," I said. "Lorna would have liked that." And then, because it felt right, I told her about Lorna's letter, about how she'd anticipated this exact situation, how she'd given me permission, no, had practically insisted that I not spend the rest of my life alone. "She sounds like she was an amazing woman," Nadine said when I finished. "She was," I said. "But here's the thing, and this is going to sound terrible. I don't want to spend the rest of our time together talking about our dead spouses." Nadine's eyes widened, and for a moment I worried I'd offended her. But then she smiled, and it was like the sun coming out from behind clouds. "Thank God," she said. "I didn't want to say it, but I feel exactly the same way. I loved Grant with everything in me, but he's gone, and I'm not, and I'm so tired of every conversation in my life revolving around loss." "So let's talk about something else," I suggested. "Like what?" "I don't know. What did you do before you retired?" As it turned out, Nadine had been a high school art teacher for 30 years. She lit up when she talked about it, about difficult students who eventually found their voice through art, about the satisfaction of helping kids see the world differently, about the chaos and joy of running a classroom full of creative teenagers. "I miss it," she admitted, "more than I thought I would. Grant and I had all these plans for retirement, travel, time with the grandkids, all the things you're supposed to do. And then he died, and suddenly I was retired and alone, and I didn't know what to do with myself. Is that why you took the pottery class? Partly, but also, she hesitated. My son was worried about me. He kept calling and asking if I was okay, and I kept lying and saying I was fine. Finally, his wife, bless her, said, "Mom, you need to find something that makes you want to get out of bed in the morning." So here I am, covered in clay every Tuesday, making mediocre bowls. They're not mediocre, I protested. Your last vase was actually really good. You're kind, she said, but I've seen your work. You're the one with actual talent. We talked for 2 hours about our children and grandchildren, about books we'd read and movies we'd seen, about the small things that filled our days. It was easy, effortless, in a way I hadn't experienced since Lorna, and that both thrilled and terrified me. As we were leaving, standing on the sidewalk outside the cafe in the pale autumn sunlight, Nadine said, "Can we do this again? The coffee, I mean, not just at pottery class." "Yes," I said. "I'd really like that." She smiled, and without thinking, I reached out and touched her hand. Just briefly, just for a second, but the connection was electric, undeniable. We were in trouble, both of us, and we knew it. The next few weeks unfolded with a strange mixture of gradual intimacy and careful boundaries. We met for coffee every few days. We talked on the phone in the evenings, conversations that started with, "I'll just call to say hi," and ended 3 hours later. We went to an art museum, a used bookstore, a concert in the park. We were dating, though neither of us used that word. We were two widowed people spending time together, finding comfort in each other's company. That was all, nothing more, except it was more. We both knew it was more. The pottery class ended after 8 weeks. On the last night, we displayed our finished projects, bowls and vases and mugs that varied wildly in quality. Mine were serviceable, functional. Nadine's were creative, a bit wonky, full of character. "I think these pieces say a lot about us," she observed as we packed them up. "Oh, what do mine say?" "That you're careful, precise, someone who values functionality." She tilted her head. "But also maybe someone who's afraid to take risks, to try something wild." "Ouch," I said, but she wasn't wrong. "What do yours say?" "That I'm messy, impulsive, and not very good at following directions," she said cheerfully. I was going to say creative and unafraid. She looked at me, and something in her expression shifted. "That's a nicer interpretation." As we walked to our cars, I realized I didn't want the evening to end. Didn't want to go back to my empty house, to the silence that would seem even more oppressive now that I'd been reminded what companionship felt like. "Nadine," I said, surprising myself with my boldness, "would you like to come over for dinner sometime? I could cook. I'm not great at it, but I've learned a few things over the past few years." "I'd love that," she said. "When?" "Friday?" "Friday," she agreed. That Friday, I cleaned my house more thoroughly than I had in years. I changed the sheets even though she wasn't going to see the bedroom. I put fresh flowers on the table. I made lasagna from a recipe Lorna used to make, then felt guilty about it and almost threw it out, then decided that was ridiculous. Nadine arrived at 7 with a bottle of wine, and that same nervous energy I'd felt when we had coffee. "This is weird, right?" she said as I let her in. "This feels weird." "Completely weird," I agreed. "Also terrifying." "Okay, good, just checking." Dinner was nice, more than nice. We ate and talked and laughed, and it felt almost normal, almost like something I could imagine doing regularly, something that could become part of my routine. After dinner, we moved to the living room. She noticed the photographs on the mantel, mostly of Lorna, of our daughter, of family gatherings from years past. "You can take them down," she said quietly. "For me, I wouldn't be offended." "I don't want to take them down," I said. "She was my life for 4 decades. That doesn't just disappear." "I know. Grant's photos are all over my house too. His son keeps suggesting I pack some away, says it might help me move on. But they're not just memories. They're proof that we lived, that we loved, that it mattered. Exactly, I said. She walked over to a photo of Lorna and me at our daughter's wedding, taken just 2 years before Lorna got sick. We looked happy, oblivious to what was coming. She was beautiful, Nadine said. She was, I agreed. But that's not why I loved her. No, I loved her because she made me laugh, because she was kind to everyone, even people who didn't deserve it, because she saw the best in people, including me, because when I was with her, I was the best version of myself. Nadine turned to look at me, and there were tears in her eyes. That's exactly how I felt about Grant. I know, I said softly. So where does that leave us? She asked. 2 people who met great loves, who lost them, who are standing here feeling things we're not sure we should be feeling? I don't know, I admitted. But I know that when I'm with you, I feel like I'm waking up after a very long sleep, and that scares me. But it also feels right. It feels right to me too, she whispered. We stood there in my living room, surrounded by photographs of our past lives, and something shifted between us. Not dramatically. There was no sudden kiss, no sweeping romantic gesture. Instead, Nadine reached for my hand, and I took it, and we sat together on the couch, fingers intertwined, not speaking, just being present with each other and with the enormity of what we were allowing ourselves to feel. I'm not ready for this to be fast, she said finally. I need it to be slow. Slow is good, I agreed. Slow is perfect. What I learned over the next few months is that loving someone at 67 is profoundly different from loving someone at 26. When you're young, love feels like diving off a cliff, exhilarating, reckless, driven by hormones and hope and the certainty that you're invincible. You don't think about the future except in vague, romantic terms. You don't bring decades of experience, of loss, of understanding how fragile life really is. But when you're older, when you've already lost the love of your life once, falling in love again is a different kind of courage. It's walking into something with your eyes wide open, knowing exactly how much it will hurt if it ends, choosing to love anyway. It's not diving off a cliff. It's carefully, deliberately deciding to climb a mountain, aware of every step, grateful for every moment. Nadine and I took it slow. We went on dates, real dates, which felt simultaneously thrilling and absurd at our age. Movies, dinners, walks in the park. We held hands like teenagers, amazed at the simple pleasure of human touch after years of being alone. We also talked endlessly about our pasts, yes, but also about our present and our future, about what we wanted from this relationship, whatever it was becoming, about our fears and hopes and the strange guilt that still crept in sometimes when we were happy. I talked to Grant last night, Nadine told me one evening, as we sat on her porch, watching the sun set. What did you say to him? I asked, not finding this strange at all. I still talk to Lorna sometimes too. I told him about you, about how I'm feeling, about how guilty I feel for being happy. She was quiet for a moment, and I swear I could hear him telling me to stop being an idiot, that he didn't die just so I could spend the rest of my life alone and miserable. I laughed. Lorna would have said something similar, probably with more colorful language. Do you think they'd like each other? Our spouses? I considered this. I think they would have. They were both teachers, both kind, both stubborn. Yeah, I think they would have gotten along well. I like that, Nadine said. I like imagining them together somewhere, rolling their eyes at how long it's taking us to figure this out. 6 months into whatever we were calling this relationship, Nadine met my daughter. I'd been terrified about this, worried that Simone would feel like I was betraying her mother's memory, that she'd resent Nadine, that it would drive a wedge between us. Instead, after an initial awkwardness, Simone pulled me aside and said, "Dad, she's good for you. I haven't seen you smile like this since before Mom got sick. You're really okay with this?" I asked. "Mom would want you to be happy," Simone said firmly. "And honestly, I've been worried about you for 3 years. It's a relief to see you living again." I met Nadine's sons, too. Marcus and Thomas, both in their 40s, both protective of their mother. They were polite but cautious, asking questions that were clearly designed to assess my intentions, to make sure I wasn't going to hurt their mother. "She's been through enough," Marcus said bluntly. "If you're not serious about this, if you're just looking for someone to pass the time—" "I'm serious," I interrupted. "I'm terrified, and I'm still figuring it out, and I'm probably going to make mistakes. But I'm serious about your mother. I struggled to find the words. "She's given me a reason to look forward instead of just looking back." Thomas, the younger son, studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Okay then." A year and a half after that first pottery class, Nadine and I were sitting in my backyard on a warm spring evening. We'd fallen into a comfortable pattern by then. We spent most evenings together, alternating between houses, but we still maintained separate homes. Neither of us had felt ready to take that next step, to officially merge our lives in such a definitive way. But lately, I'd been thinking about it, about how much easier it would be if we didn't have to pack bags, if we just came home to the same place, about how nice it would be to wake up next to her every morning, not just the mornings when we'd planned a sleepover like we were in high school. "Nadine," I said, setting down my glass of wine, "can I ask you something?" "That's a dangerous tone," she said, but she was smiling. "Go ahead." "What are we doing?" "At this exact moment, drinking wine and avoiding the mosquitoes." "You know what I mean. What are we doing? We've been together for over a year. We spend almost every day together. We're in love. Yes, we are. Don't look at me like that. But we're still maintaining separate houses, separate lives in a way. Why?" She was quiet for a moment, considering. "Fear, I suppose. Fear that if we make it too official, too permanent, we're somehow betraying what we had before. Fear that we're too old to start over. Fear that it won't work and we'll have uprooted everything for nothing." "Those are all valid fears," I said. "I have them too. But I also have a question. Are we going to let fear dictate how we spend whatever time we have left?" "That's a cheerful way to put it," she said dryly. "I'm serious, Nadine. We're not kids. We don't have forever. Hell, we might not even have 20 years. But we have right now, and I don't want to spend right now being cautious and careful and afraid." "What are you saying, Merritt?" I took a deep breath. I hadn't planned this, didn't have a ring or a speech prepared. But suddenly, it seemed like the most obvious thing in the world. I'm saying, marry me. Or don't marry me if that feels too soon or too much. But move in with me. Sell one of our houses. Merge our lives properly. Stop hedging our bets and just commit to this. To us. She stared at me. And for a horrible moment, I thought I'd miscalculated, pushed too hard, scared her away. Then she started crying. "Nadine." "Yes," she said through her tears. "Yes to all of it. Marry me. Live with me. Let's stop being ridiculous." "Really?" "Really," she said, laughing and crying at the same time. Grant would be so annoyed with me for taking this long. He always said I overthought everything. I pulled her close, and we sat there in my backyard, soon to be our backyard, holding each other as the sun set and the mosquitoes came out, and the world kept spinning forward. We got married 6 months later. Not a big wedding. Neither of us wanted that. Just our children and grandchildren, a few close friends, and a simple ceremony in Nadine's backyard, which had a better garden than mine. Simone stood beside me. Marcus stood beside his mother. The officiant was an old friend of Grant's who'd agreed to do the ceremony despite never having performed a wedding before. "I've known Nadine since she and Grant were newlyweds," he said during the ceremony. And I know Grant would approve of this match, because the thing about Grant and about Lorna, too, from everything I've heard, is that they loved deeply. And people who love deeply don't want the people they love to stop living when they're gone. They want the opposite. They want their loved ones to keep going, keep growing, keep finding joy. I looked at Nadine, standing across from me in a simple blue dress, her silver hair shining in the afternoon sun. And I thought about the improbability of it all. That we'd both signed up for a pottery class we didn't particularly care about. That we'd happened to sit next to each other. That we'd both been brave enough to say yes when it would have been easier to say no. "Do you, Merritt, take Nadine to be your wife?" the officiant asked. "I do," I said, my voice steady despite the tears on my face. "Do you, Nadine, take Merritt to be your husband?" "I do," she said, squeezing my hands. We exchanged rings, simple bands, nothing fancy. We kissed while our families cheered. And then we had cake and champagne and listened to our grandchildren run around the yard. And it was perfect in its imperfection, in its smallness, in its acknowledgement that this was a second chance at something precious. Later that evening, after everyone had gone home, Nadine and I sat on her porch, our porch now, and watched the stars come out. "Do you think they're watching?" she asked. "Grant and Lorna?" "I don't know," I said honestly, "but I think they'd be happy for us if they were." "I think so too." She leaned her head on my shoulder. "Thank you." "For what?" "For being brave enough to take that pottery class. For sitting next to me. For talking to me about clay and bowls, and eventually about everything else. For letting yourself love again." "Thank you for the same," I said. "For showing me that it's possible to honor the past while still living in the present. For making me laugh. For making me feel like myself again." "Who knew clay could be so romantic?" she said with a smile. We sat there in the darkness, two people who'd lived full lives, who'd loved and lost, and somehow found the courage to love again. We weren't young. We weren't starting fresh. We carried our histories with us, our scars and sorrows and the ghosts of the people we'd loved before. But we also carried hope, and that, I'd learned, was more than enough. I'm 70 years old now. Nadine and I have been married for nearly 3 years, together for almost 5. It's not a long time in the grand scheme of things, but at our age, we measure time differently. We count in moments rather than years, in the accumulation of small joys rather than distant futures. If you're reading this and you've lost someone you love, I want you to know something. It's okay to move forward. It's okay to find happiness again. It doesn't mean you loved any less. It doesn't mean you've forgotten. It means you're human, and humans are built to love, to connect, to find meaning in companionship. I will always love Lorna. She shaped who I am, and no amount of time will change that. But I also love Nadine, differently perhaps, but no less deeply. The heart I've discovered is more expansive than I ever imagined. It can hold multiple loves, multiple eras, multiple versions of happiness, without diminishing any of them. Here's what else I've learned. It's never too late to start over. At 67, I thought my life was essentially over, that I was just counting down the days. But life, as it turns out, had other plans. There's no age limit on new beginnings, on second chances, on finding joy in unexpected places. Fear is a terrible compass. If I'd listened to my fears of betraying Lorna's memory, of being judged, of getting hurt again, I would have missed out on these years with Nadine. Fear keeps you safe, but it also keeps you small. Grief and joy can coexist. I still have days when I miss Lorna so acutely it takes my breath away. But I can also feel that grief while simultaneously feeling grateful for Nadine, for my life now. They're not mutually exclusive emotions. Love looks different the second time around. It's less about grand gestures and more about small kindnesses. It's knowing when the other person needs space and when they need closeness. It's appreciating every ordinary day because you know how quickly those days can disappear. Community matters. Having our children's support, having friends who understood, made all the difference. Grief and love are not solitary experiences. We need people around us. People who will tell us when we're being too cautious, when we need to take a risk, when we need to keep living. Most importantly, I've learned that honoring the dead doesn't mean joining them in stillness. It means living fully, loving deeply, embracing whatever time we have with gratitude and courage. Morna didn't save me from drowning, only to have me spend the rest of my life afraid of the water. Nadine and I don't know how long we have together. None of us do. But we wake up every morning grateful for another day, another chance to make coffee for each other, to argue about the thermostat, to find each other's feet under the covers at night. We still have our pottery pieces from that first class. They sit on our mantle next to the photographs of our former spouses, of our children, of all the lives we've lived. They're not perfect. They're lumpy and misshapen and clearly made by amateurs. But they're ours. They mark the beginning of something unexpected and precious. Sometimes Nadine looks at them and laughs. We've gotten better at this, she says, meaning pottery, meaning life, meaning love. And she's right. We have gotten better. Not perfect. We still argue, still have difficult days, still carry our sorrows with us. But better, stronger, more fully alive. If there's a lesson in all this, it's simple. Say yes. When life offers you a second chance, take it. When you meet someone who makes you laugh, who understands your grief without being consumed by it, who makes you want to wake up in the morning, don't run from it. Run toward it. Love after 60 isn't what I expected. It's quieter, deeper, more aware of its own fragility. But it's also richer for all that we've experienced, all that we've survived, all that we know about how precious and temporary everything is. Lorna was right, as she usually was. The heart doesn't have a finite capacity. It expands. And if you're lucky enough, brave enough, to let it expand again after it's been broken, you might discover that there's still more life ahead of you than you ever imagined. I'm 70 years old, and I'm in love. Lightning, it turns out, can strike twice, and I'm grateful for every bolt.